Welcome. Welcome to our Saltmarsh Rehabilitation Information and Engagement Evening for Tuggerah Lakes. Thank you so much for joining us. 6 till 8 p.m. is a really dedicated time to be joining us. I know that for some of you, that's really valuable family time. And so we really, really appreciate you choosing to spend this time with us this evening to help provide your input, your feedback, your contributions to the work that we're doing for Tuggerah Lakes for rehabilitating this really important salt marsh habitat. We really, really value your feedback and input and contributions. So thank you so much for giving us your time. We promise that we won't waste it. I would really quickly like to introduce the team. So my name's Ashley. My role at Central Coast Council is Senior Science Communicator. And I'm specifically focused now in the estuary management team. Everyone that you can see here, we all form the estuary management team. So Vanessa is our team leader of estuary management. And we have Sashi and Sevi online. They're both estuary project officers. We have Mel online. She's an estuary management officer. And Nick works closely alongside me in an environmental education officer role. So lots of diverse expertise across education and communication with Nick and I, and in various project management and marine biology, environmental science roles for the project team. We're all from the Central Coast. We all live locally. We're all part of the community. And as part of the community, as residents, we all really value having the incredible healthy lake ecosystem in the same way that all of you guys do. We love it and care for it and are passionate about it just as much as, or probably more so than your average Central Coast resident. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we come to work every day. We want to help protect the estuary. We want to help provide the community with the best possible environment and recreational services and facilities and events and opportunities. So we're all very, very passionate. I'm so lucky to work in a team of such passionate, smart, talented, capable individuals. I was just saying to the team today how grateful I am to work with such an amazing team. So hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that you have. And we really look forward to going on this journey together tonight, really working together to go through these plans that we have and getting your input on the plans. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me as I pop up the presentation that we've put together. We've been working on this one for quite a while. Hopefully this works. Share, there we go. Can everyone see that? Beautiful. All right. I would like to acknowledge our funding body. So the Australian government very generously has provided the funds for this program, for this workshop, these works, and for our time through their Environment Restoration Fund program. So that's an ongoing grant that we've had for a couple of years now. It's a really beautiful, big, generous grant from the Australian government that's covering the cost of all of these programs. It's really important for us to acknowledge them. And I think it's also important for the community to know where the funds are coming from in this instance for this project, in light of all of the current situations that are happening on the Central Coast. There we go. All right. I am very, very, very passionate about acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we meet on, and being a virtual meeting tonight. It's a great opportunity for us each to individually take a moment to think about the traditional custodians of our individual land that we are individually on, wherever that may be in the world, even over in Portugal. I think it's really important that we all just reflect on the tens of thousands of years of history, the custodians who walked on that land, who fought on that land, who cared for that land, and who have so much to pass on to us if we're open in our hearts and our minds to listen to what they have to share with us. And I'd like to welcome any Indigenous people who might be joining us this evening, and thank you for your contribution to the continuation of the legacy of knowledge and care that has been passed down for so many years. And I think in particularly in the context of Tuggerah Lakes, it's really important to recognise the dark and young people who have so beautifully cared for and respected and held that land for so long in a way that was so beautifully cared for. It's a really important place, Tuggerah Lakes, and it's got so much cultural history, and the Indigenous custodians really did do the best job of looking after it. And I think we have a lot to learn from them and their ways of being such incredible custodians for the environment. So a really good thing for us to have in mind as we talk through what we can do and what we can learn and share tonight in doing our bit to continue the legacy of caring for that land. As an overview of what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk about Tuggerah Lakes as a system in general to start with. We're going to just quickly look at the type of lake that it is and how it functions. Things like an ICOL. I don't know if anyone knows what an ICOL is. It stands for intermittently closed and open lake or lagoon. It's quite an unusual type of waterway in the world. They're really quite rare in other parts of the world. So we're very lucky to have such a unique ecosystem here. And the way that Tuggerah Lakes functions is quite unique in so many ways. So we're going to talk about some of those really big overview concepts that relate to sort of estuary ecology that underpin the management actions and the decisions that we need to make when we're managing it. So we'll go through some water quality things and talk about the importance of the catchment, because really it's a very big catchment feeding into Tuggerah Lakes, and we really need to concentrate our management not just on the lakes themselves, but on all the catchment that feeds into the lakes. We'll then talk specifically about saltmarsh. I know this is a saltmarsh information even. You guys are here to hear about saltmarsh. So we'll learn at a high level, like what is saltmarsh? Why is it so important? It's an endangered ecological community. So really lucky to have that here on the Central Coast, and talk about why it's important, why it's such an incredible species that can actually do so much for us in terms of helping to improve water quality and our environment here around Tuggerah Lakes. And then we're going to talk specifically about each of the individual projects that we're working on. So we have 4 different project sites that we're going to be launching to you guys tonight. 4 different sites around San Remo, Budgewoi, Tacoma, Lake Munmorah. We're going to go through each one individually, show you our plans, get your feedback on our plans, see what you think. And then we can open the mics up for anyone who has any questions or comments, anyone who'd like to say anything on the microphone. We'll let you turn on your microphones and you guys can chat to us. If at any time throughout the whole night you want to chat to us, 2 ways to do that. You can either put a question in the Q&A box, or you can type something into the chat. So if it's like a very specific question, you'd really specifically like it answered, pop it in the Q&A. If you just have some comments to make, something that you want everyone to see, part of a conversation, pop it up in the chat. We'll be monitoring both of those, and we'll be making sure that we try and answer everything as we go. Anything that we can't answer, we'll get back to. If we don't answer it straight away, it might be because we're going to come to it. Otherwise, we'll definitely make sure that we get to it by the end of tonight, and hopefully everyone's questions will be answered.
Hey Ash, Jackie has just asked if it's being recorded and if it will be made available for a later date for people to view, because she might not be able to stay for the full time.
Yeah, yep.
Thank
So
you.
we are recording, and yeah, I'll pop it on YouTube if that's okay with everyone.
Thanks.
I'll send out the link. Too easy. Technology makes those sorts of things very easy. Definitely happy to share. Thanks for the question, Jackie. And the reason that I put this slide up to start with is just to remember so many of the things that we love about Tuggerah Lakes, why it's so special. We've got, that's a picture I took kayaking in one of our tours just last week. It's just so beautiful and glassy, that beautiful golden sunset. We have the white seahorse and the little tern, really incredible wildlife living in our lakes. The opportunity to fish and bike ride and kayak and boat. So many kilometers of beautiful shared pathways, beautiful nature trails, bush hikes. It really is an incredible lake system. We're so lucky to have it. And yeah, I think that's a really nice tone to start with, because essentially we're all here for the love of what we do. So yeah, I am now going to hand over to Vanessa.
Thanks, Ash. 1 second, I'll just sort my...
All right, Ness, I've given you control of the mouse. Just make sure that works. Oh no, Ness. Your internet.
Is it not working well?
It glitched a little bit. You're back now. Fingers crossed.
Okay. If there's an issue, I can switch over. Ugh.
Okay. You're good.
1 second. All right. So Tuggerah Lakes is, well, it's known as the jewel of the Central Coast, and it's a barrier estuary that's located on our coastline. It's the 8th largest estuary in New South Wales, and it's got a huge catchment area. So the catchment is about 10 times the size of the lake itself. It's broad and shallow, and it's perched slightly above sea level. So the average water level is about 20 to 30 centimetres above the average ocean level. So most of the water that comes into the lake, oh, Ash, it's not letting me, oh no, it's gone too far now.
Oh,
sorry,
just
everybody.
A little bit of a delay. You're right.
There is. Get a preview of my next slide. Ugh.
Try the arrows instead. It might just go one at a time.
Yeah, I am, but it's not working. All right. I think I'm good.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay.
So most of the water that comes into the lake comes from that catchment area. So we've got 5 major river systems, Wallara Creek, Wyong River, Arimba Creek, Tumby Creek, and Saltwater Creek. And in an average year, they deliver about 193,000 megalitres of water. Interestingly, we've all seen floods in recent years, and, that floodplain filling and drying, which is a natural process for an estuary. And in the February 2020 flood event, about 65% of that average annual rainfall came down in the space of, 4 or 5 days. And so there's a significantly, I've clicked it and it's not, there we go. Oh gosh.
There we go.
There's a significantly smaller amount of water that comes in and out of the estuary through the entrance. And so research has shown that that's around about 1 or 2% on a daily basis. And that's even when the entrance is wide open. That water that comes in generally goes into the basin areas in the middle of the lake and, is dissipated further away from the entrance itself. And that's really, the water going into the basin is a really important concept that I'll touch on as we move along through the presentation. Okay. So if we take a look at how things have changed over time, going back to pre-European settlement, the catchments were well vegetated, the rain would fall and clear water would flush down through, the rivers and through wetlands into salt marshes, and then eventually into the estuary itself. And the estuary was covered, most of it was covered in, healthy seagrass beds, had plenty of fish and birds, and generally quite good water quality. An important thing to remember about that too is that, you look back on the historic records and people still say there was heaps of wrack around. There was thick seagrass beds that were impassable by boat at times, and it still smelled bad at times. That is what Tuggerah Lakes is. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind, I suppose, as we plan for its future. But if we shoot forward from there 100 years or so, humans have completely redefined that landscape. We've cleared lots of the bushland, we've filled and drained wetlands, we've built houses, we've built roads. All of those changes, they change the quality of water coming into the system. They change the hydrology, so more water hits a hard surface and runs straight into the lake. And that all of those gradual changes impact on the estuary downstream. And it's really only over the past, 20 years or thereabouts that we've started to think about the implications of those actions in the catchment. So if we zoom out and have a look at that catchment area, it's important to recognise how significant that area is on the estuary itself. Tuggerah Lakes is one of the best understood estuaries in New South Wales, and probably more broadly than that. There's so much research that's been done, and we know from that research and real life experience that what goes into the lake pretty much stays in the lake. And so it's important for us to recognise that we need to make good decisions about what's happening in the catchment. It's kind of like a human body. If you're putting good things in, you have a healthy system. But if you keep putting bad stuff in, then you expect the system to decline in health. And so I mentioned earlier that the entrance is really insignificant in what's going on in the lake itself. And so we need to turn our collective action to the catchment, and specifically those natural filters that are still present. And so those are our coastal wetlands, our bushlands, riparian corridors along rivers and creeks. And these areas, these natural systems, filter some of that water, and they kind of act like the kidneys of the estuary, taking out some of that natural and unnatural material and preventing it from making its way into the lake. So I suppose we're lucky that around 45% of the catchment is still vegetated, but as you can see from the map, most of that is those upslope areas where it's not really suitable for development, but we have collectively really cleared the floodplain areas. And so these are really the areas that are driving the quality of water we see in the lakes today. The good news is that there's still 36 square kilometres of coastal wetland around the Tuggerah Lakes catchment. And for scale, that's about twice the size of the suburb of Tuggerah. So it's still a fairly substantial amount of good quality coastal wetland. And we've been working really hard amongst council and with project partners to protect and restore these areas. So if we have a bit of a closer look at those shorelines, you can see the change over time here. And I talk about quite often the lake basins and the nearshore zone. And you can see both of those two areas quite well in these pictures. So in the 1941 image, there were, back then, more typically sandy shorelines. So, an estuary naturally fills in with mud and fine sediment. So to say that it was all sand is not true, but they were sandier than they are now. And you can see there were ridges in the sand that were, generated by wind blowing along those shorelines. And the seagrass was typically out in the middle, not right up against the edge. So as time's gone by, and we've cleared the catchment and more, sediment comes down the catchment, more nutrients, there's more algal growth. The water is more cloudy more often, and we call this turbidity. And when the water is persistently turbid, plants can't grow. So seagrass, beg your pardon, is a plant. And so the longer that water is cloudy, the less chance there is for that seagrass to stay healthy in the middle of the lake. And so over time, it's just moved closer and closer to the edge and dropped away from those middle zones. So if you think about the lake being like a lawn, right? So you've got seagrass that grows all across the bottom. When the seagrass is all connected, then when the wind blows and the water stirs it up, you can't pick that sediment up really and stir it up into the water. So the water in the lake was clearer back then. And as that seagrass has been lost, now every time the wind blows, it picks up that sediment and stirs it up in the water column, which anybody who lives around Tuggerah Lakes would recognize, right through summer, the middle of the lake is brown and muddy, and that's why. And so we've had this shift of seagrass from the middle right out to the edge. And you can see that in the 2020 image, that the seagrass is right along the edge. And so the scientists call this hydraulic decoupling. And that's basically, in simple terms, instead of having one nicely connected waterway, we have these two separate zones. We've got the basins, and then we've got the nearshore zone, and they're quite cut off from one another because of that band of seagrass along the edge. And so then, as we've got more development, we've got more drains, and all of the pollution from our catchment areas comes straight into that nearshore zone, and it stays there. And so that is why we have worse water quality along the edges of the lake. And, the middles are generally, in terms of scientific water quality, better. So when I talk about that pollution, the main pollutants we get are nitrogen, phosphorus, and fine sediment. And those are the key things that we know are causing the problems in Tuggerah Lakes. And so the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus, are really just plant food. So when they come into the system, those plants that can grow really quickly are the phytoplankton and the macroalgae, and the seagrass doesn't really like that intensive nutrient concentration, and so that's why it's struggling. And then it's just catching up with me. I think, did I click? There we go. Oh, I knew I'd go too far. I think I'm good. So, when we're talking about that nearshore zone, the gradient of the shoreline really matters as well. So where we have modified edges, we've got, this steep edge on the lake, that material, when the water level fluctuates and there's wind waves pushing into the shore, it gets stuck there. So all that material just stays in the nearshore zone and it breaks down and it affects the way the sediment decomposes material and just, all goes in a bad direction. But on the flip side, if we do have that natural gradient, like you can see in this image here, you might have, minor fluctuations in water level because of rainfall or minor floods or, just a windy day pushing the waves up, and that material washes up onto the shoreline. And that's where we want it to be, because that's where it, provides food for those terrestrial plants and gets out of the water. All right, so I'm just going to quickly touch on our estuary management plan. So we have had an estuary management plan in place since 2007, and we've been working systematically to implement that plan over these last 12 years or so. We have been really fortunate to receive ongoing federal funding to deliver these programs, and so 86% of the actions identified in that plan are either completed or ongoing. The next slide I've got just shows you some of the places that those activities have been taking place, but I'll just draw your attention to the website down the bottom. We're actually in the process of updating our coastal management program for Tuggerah Lakes at the moment, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in the same way we are about Tuggerah Lakes to register to participate in our focus groups, because you could be part of that planning process. So this map is live on our website. You can go into it and you can click around on all of these icons and see the various different projects that we've been delivering over those 10 years all around the lake. There's a lot of them. And I just think it's useful to touch on the water quality trends, because that's obviously why we're here. This graphic is for the whole Central Coast, but you can see that of the 16 sites we've got in Tuggerah Lakes, 11 of them over the past 10 years have an improving trend. And then we have 3 of those sites which are stable and have been for that 10-year period. And we have 2 sites up in Lake Munmorah that are experiencing a decline. And so when we're thinking about planning, actions around our catchments, we need to think about these baseline results and trying to improve that trend everywhere. And finally, this is just a summary of the achievements through that estuary management plan. And I'll just draw your attention to the wetland conservation and rehabilitation target in the first row, and then the saltmarsh reconstruction and rehabilitation figures there as well. We have worked to protect about 650 hectares of coastal wetland over the last 10 years. And that's through, fencing, revegetation, weed removal, pest control, loads of different things to protect those areas. And we continue to do so at the moment. And we've also either reconstructed or rehabilitated around 48 hectares of salt marsh around Tuggerah Lakes. So, those projects keep rolling over, and that's why in combination we're seeing, that trend towards improved water quality. So I won't talk any further. Sevi's going to talk to you in more detail about coastal salt marsh now. So I'll hand over to Sevi.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Thank you everyone for turning out tonight. I'm really excited to have a discussion about this topic. Sorry, just having a bit of delay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I'd like to talk a bit about what exactly coastal saltmarsh is. So coastal saltmarsh is a fragile plant community that grows in a very specific elevation with a sweet spot around 0.2 to 0.3 AHD. And it's a salt tolerant, mostly treeless floral plant community consisting of low-lying succulents, rushes, sedges, and grasses. Saltmarsh typically grows along gently sloped foreshores where moisture and salinity are maintained by both surface water and groundwater. And as you can see here, we've got a few different examples of coastal saltmarsh species. I'm sure most of you have seen these around the lake on your walks, either before or after work. So we have in the middle there, we have the sea purslane, the Sesuvium portulacustrum. We have the sea rush down the bottom as well, the Juncus kraussii, beaded samphire as well down the bottom, saltbush, and the purple creeper too. Oops. So where can saltmarsh be found? Coastal saltmarsh grows all around the lakes and estuaries of the Central Coast, and particularly in underdeveloped foreshore areas. But coastal saltmarsh can also be found in developed areas, but these communities are more fragmented and clustered. And coastal saltmarsh in decline. The Central Coast's foreshores have experienced considerable negative impacts through urbanization, development, and disturbance through human activities. These fragile ecosystems continue to face compounding pressures from foreshore modification, from mowing to the foreshore edge, and the clearing of native saltmarsh vegetation. A recent study was conducted by the DPI, and it concluded that from 12 to 97% of coastal saltmarsh species has been destroyed around New South Wales. And due to the reduction in the extent of these species and the ongoing threats to its survival, it was declared as an endangered ecological community. And we can see here in these images here, we've got an example of the mowing to the foreshore. You can see how healthy the saltmarsh is along the foreshore area, with it wanting to migrate further up to the pathway there. And we can see that it's been quite low, and that isn't something we want to see. And on the right-hand side of the slideshow, we have a very destroyed and devastated system. There's been extensive impacts through vehicle access that's contributing to excess turbidity and sedimentation of the nearshore zone. So saltmarsh, the solution. So coastal saltmarsh has a lot of benefits that it provides not only to humans, but also the environment. Sorry, my computer seems to be having some trouble. Okay, so saltmarsh acts like the kidneys of the lake, where it slows down water. It helps to filter and also absorb a lot of pollutants and chemicals that are around the nearshore zone. The saltmarsh is really effective at sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So it can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and it allows that chemical to help assist it in absorbing pollution from the water. It's really effective of capturing and acting as a drying deposition area for wrack in periods of inundation where the water rises in times of flooding and high rainfall. The water will rise and deposit the seagrass onto the foreshore area, onto the saltmarsh, which aids in providing excess nutrients into the soil and provides a nice area for the wrack to break down and dry on land. The saltmarsh also provides a really helpful benefit against erosion on the foreshore zones. The root systems of these communities are quite resilient and really help to retain the sediment and foreshore area, much more so than just regular buffalo grass or any kind of turf that's being mown to the foreshore. In often cases, you can see when you're walking through the foreshore areas, a lot of impacts through erosion that are generated through wind and wave driven swash. And of course, it's a really fantastic area for habitat. It provides food and areas for birds and crustaceans and insects to live and to feed. And also with that and the additional bird life, it's fantastic for watching birds, for having those really nice walks at sunset or sunrise, and just really appreciating the estuary. Here we can see just 2 examples of some impacted foreshore areas. And on the right is a more desirable foreshore that we're trying to reinstate around the Central Coast estuaries. So on the left, we can see that there's been heavy modification of the foreshore area. There's been a seawall or a kind of barrier put in there at the foreshore zone, which is producing a hard edge and a lip that is preventing that seagrass wrack from being lifted up and depositing on the foreshore there. And when the wrack is unable to emerge and place itself on the land and on the saltmarsh, it's unable to do so, and therefore has no other option but to break down in the water. And that's a process called anaerobic decomposition. And that can contribute to the foul smells and odors that we can experience when we either walk or drive by the lakes under those prevailing conditions. But if we have a look on the other side, we can see that gentle slope and gradient with the foreshore gently easing into the water, and the wrack is able to be lifted up and deposited onto the foreshore, where it can provide extra nutrients and provide propagules to the saltmarsh, helping it to grow in a more healthier condition. Okay, so a bit about the passive saltmarsh rehabilitation works that we're doing. So typically we opt for the passive saltmarsh rehabilitation techniques when there exists more ideal and favorable conditions. So areas where the saltmarsh gradient's already existing, where there's indicators that there's been healthy growth already existing, and the conditions are right to reinstate that saltmarsh habitat. So the first thing we do is try and encourage any illegal mowing, any kind of encroachment into the area to cease. Then we introduce a weed control program where we engage with local bush regeneration teams to reduce the density and the extent of invasive weed species to the area. If required, we'll then go through and improve the soil condition to reduce any compaction that may exist on site. And then we will source mulch or seagrass wrack that's been either collected or deposited on the nearshore zone to mulch the area out. This material is then secured in place with coir mesh, and coir is a naturally occurring coconut fiber that is biodegradable, and that provides the perfect kind of medium for native species to grow in amongst, to they're retained nice and securely in that area too. And then the coir is then secured in place by the weed mat pins, so it's unable to be lifted up in times of rain or flooding. Once the coir mesh is installed, we then go through and translocate saltmarsh species. So our team will identify ideal donor sites that have healthy communities of saltmarsh. We then translocate those into ideal spots along the saltmarsh area. We then may even source plants of provenance, which means the seeds that were collected from saltmarsh plants in the immediate area, they're local, there's no chance of them being invasive, and then we establish those in the area as well. Once works are complete, we then establish a no-mow zone. We place signs that are round pegs at the bottom of the site that create a barrier, just as an educational kind of sign, just to deter any kind of encroachment into the saltmarsh site and prevent any kind of damage in the area. And in this slide here, more of an example slide, you can kind of see the process of what I was talking about earlier. So in the top left-hand side, we can see that there's a modified shoreline. You can see in the water there, the wrack's trapped in the water. It's unable to beach itself and dry in the air. We can see that there's a very hard edge along the saltmarsh foreshore there too. Following that, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, the works have commenced. There's been the profiling of the foreshore through the machine works. There's a barrier for erosion control out in the water as well, and a fish passage fence to allow fish to enter and exit when they please. To the top right, after the site has been graded to a desirable grade and one that's going to be effective for recruiting saltmarsh, it's then mulched and the koi mesh is laid on top and secured in place. And then finally at the bottom there, on the bottom right, the end goal is a healthy, vibrant saltmarsh that is a perfect spot for birds and other animals to live and thrive. And in this slide here, I'd just like to show you some examples of some passive saltmarsh sites that we've completed in the past few years. The top left, we can see an example from Peel Street at Tuggerah. It's quite infested with weeds and unwanted species. The same process down the bottom left there as well. After works were completed, the weeds were treated. We also went through and removed saplings of casuarinas, and this was done because they have a tendency to kind of take over the area. So we removed those to protect the integrity of the saltmarsh. Once the weeds were removed, then we went through and laid down that mulch and the coir mesh on top. And moving on to the middle example, which saw a really dramatic improvement. And this example is at Ashley Chapman Reserve at Budgewoi. Quite an impacted foreshore area. There's excessive sedimentation. The ground's been quite trampled. There was evidence of dirt bikes and other kind of vehicles accessing this site. And this site was selected due to that, the sediment source it's providing to the nearshore zone, which then turns into, a really big issue for turbidity in that area. So then, as was before, we went through and treated the weeds, added the saltmarsh, the seagrass rack, my mistake, and then went through and secured in place the koi mesh. And as you can see down the bottom there, we're getting all the encroachment from the native species coming through. That's called Paspalum vaginatum, which is a native seagrass, native saltmarsh species, and that's now establishing all the way through. And finally, on the far right, again, very similar to the previous example at Ashley Chapman Reserve, a very impacted foreshore site, lots of exposed sediment, and yeah, a really problematic area for sedimentation and turbidity of the nearshore zone. And again, the same process was employed. You can see how dramatic that change is only over a course of a few years. We have a lot of diversity, a lot of healthy saltmarsh reinstated through that area, which was quite an impressive result. Okay, now onto active saltmarsh. So we briefly had a chat about the passive saltmarsh. Now, active saltmarsh is rehabilitation is a process where more physical works are required to reinstate that desirable gradient. Often cases, foreshore areas be quite severely impacted, have very, very heavily impacted lips on the foreshore area where wrack just can't deposit and break down naturally. So in those cases, we need to go through with machinery and reinstate those foreshore zones. Before we engage in these works, we have a very thorough and intensive planning phase. We engage with professional ecologists and have in-depth discussions with them to come up with a rehabilitation plan. They provide really important information to us about the site characteristics, different strategies we need to employ so we can get the best outcome for the environment and the community. Active saltmarsh rehabilitation often involves the use of geological material or rocks or natural barriers and wave energy dissipators. So we can alleviate the erosion issues that we're having in a lot of these areas. The slopes of the saltmarsh is also regraded to an appropriate level. And then once those physical works are completed, we then go through with a similar process back in the passive saltmarsh techniques where we mulch with seagrass, we stabilize again with coir mesh, and then we re-vegetate the area with local saltmarsh species. And here we have an image of an active saltmarsh example. This one was out at Colony Vale as well back a couple of years ago now. And we can see in the top left-hand corner, quite a impacted site, heavily overrun with weeds. The wrack is also being prevented from establishing up into the saltmarsh zone. So we went through with the excavator. We treated the weeds first, primarily. And then as we progress on the top row, the excavator is going in there, regrading the foreshore, putting in that appropriate profile for saltmarsh to accrue. In the bottom left-hand side, you can see in more detail there the fish passage zones with the wrack fences. And these wrack fences are put in place to prevent detached wrack from smothering the site during times of wind and rain. When the lake levels rise, often that's ideally, that's when we want the seagrass wrack to deposit on the saltmarsh sites, but during the construction phase, it's undesirable for us. So the wrack fences are put in place. We also have in there eco logs, which again are biodegradable, constructed from coconut husk and fiber, and that's there to aid in against erosion issues and sedimentation. And once that profile is completed, you can see there it's been cleared of any kind of vegetation and the grade's at an appropriate level. We then, in the bottom middle picture, go through, we put in clean fill material and growth medium for the plants. And then on top of that, we rack the area with the seagrass mulch. Then we apply the coir mesh again, and then plant into that material there. And once we complete those that process, we have the finished result, which is a more functioning and effective saltmarsh habitat. Not only does it function well, we're getting the wrack to deposit in an effective way. We're having that aerobic decomposition. We reduce the smell in the nearshore zone, and also providing great habitat for birds, animals, crustaceans, and insects, and contribute in a more positive way and get better outcomes for water quality. I'll now hand over to Sashi, who will be talking to you about the Environmental Restoration Fund grant and sites in more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Sevi. Appreciate it. I like some of those pictures you had on the last slide there of the different stages of it. I remember working on some of those sites with you back when we were on the tools. So I'm going to just give you guys a bit of an overview on the funding source, which is the federal government grant initiative, the Environment Restoration Fund. The ERF funding provides council with the $4.7 million worth of funding over 4 years, and that funding goes towards projects which with environmental rehabilitation focus. The program consists of around 30 different projects in areas of research, stormwater management, environmental education, rehabilitation of wetlands, bushland, stream banks, and salt marsh also. So the way that the grant process works is that council submits an application to the federal government, and if it is approved, they provide funding towards the specific projects which are detailed within the grant application, and that funding can only go towards those specific projects. So we manage, council that is, manage the program by engaging local consultants and contractors to do various different elements of the planning and delivery of the projects in consultation with council. So the 4 specific active saltmarsh rehab project sites where you guys are joining us today to talk about are located at Budgewoi, San Remo, Lake Munmorah, and Rocky Point. Due to the important role saltmarsh plays in the ecology of the estuary, its restoration is a priority outlined in the Central Coast Council's Estuary Management Plan. The saltmarsh restoration sites in the Environment Restoration Fund grant were selected based according to priority, with some deciding factors being whether the site is experiencing erosion, whether the site is contributing to sedimentation, turbidity, and poor water quality outcomes, whether there are impacts to natural processes, and whether there will be an ecological benefit. Will the end result enhance environmental and recreational outcomes, including positive water quality? Will completing the project improve ecological resilience and endangered ecological community connectivity? So I'm just providing a sample cross-section on the slide there. This will show you a cross-section of active salt marsh, an active salt marsh site once the works have been done. So once it's been regraded to, you can see that there's a gradual slope from the lakewood edge, which is on the right-hand side there, which is the low marsh area. It gradually increases in height, and we're not talking much, we're talking, you know, millimeters, centimeters. So it gradually increases in height, then we go to the mid-marsh and then the high marsh, and then often sites will, you know, either merge into the surrounding vegetation, or whether it be a reserve along there or a shared pathway at that stage. So I'm going to run you guys through some specific details on the rehabilitation sites I mentioned before. So first we're going to look at Budgewoi Saltmarsh Rehabilitation Site. So the location map here, it shows the site's proximity to Budgewoi Beach. You can see on the right-hand side, you can see Scenic Drive along there and the bridge, and Budgewoi Lake here, and just the bottom end of Lake Munmorah there. So the site itself is just along the point here. I don't know if you can tell, but just at the top of the frame there is where the Hibiscus Hotel is, and you can see on this there's the shared pathway that runs through the site there. Can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah, yep, we can see it moving.
Great. Okay. There's the shared pathway that runs there. So that section of the shared pathway will be temporarily closed during the construction phase of the works, but construction phase can run from, say, like a week to 4. So hopefully, weather permitting, it won't take that long. Here we've got a design plan for the active salt marsh areas. The site itself has been split up into 3 zones. On the right-hand side is zone 3. It will, as you can see, there's a lot of markings, a lot of drawings on the plan there. It will have the most modification, but the areas behind that are marked with the red hash, the works that will be undertaken in that area is purely just weed control. And then in the green hashed area that floats on behind that, working our way towards the lake itself, is where there'll be supplementary planting and weed control of salt marsh. Now the areas with a lot of polygons in there marking things out will be the bays in which there will be the improvement, the modification of the foreshore. So this particular site will have a bit of infill to create an appropriate gradient for to expand the salt marsh community in there. And we will have little mounds as well to increase habitat and to provide diversity and range as well, create some little microclimates in there. So you can see the photo on the bottom right-hand side of this slide here is a healthy salt marsh foreshore. So the aim is to get to that kind of a state. Obviously, if you have more detailed questions on any of the plans or specific projects, I think that Ash is going to drop a email in there so that you guys can contact us and feedback any more detailed inquiries. Next, I'm going to talk to you guys about the San Remo Saltmarsh Rehabilitation Site. So here's another location map just showing the site's proximity to we've got Wallara Creek coming in there, Lyamine Avenue there. You can see up in the top left-hand corner, Pacific Highway there. And here is a closer vision of the rehabilitation area. The reserve that it backs onto is John Peter Howard Reserve. The site was selected due to the existing vegetation communities within the site area, foreshore grade, suitability of the site for restoring salt marsh habitat, and also the reserve area behind it is quite extensive, so any works wouldn't impact the ability for recreation within the reserve. This is just displaying the general arrangement plan of the rehabilitation area. So as you can see here, it's been split up into multiple zones. The zones, you can tell by the contour lines there that they also increase gradually in slope as they work their way back. And on the bottom left, we have zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, zone 6, and zone 7, with the drainage line running through the center of that. Here we've got the zone 2, and you can see marked by the colours in the back area the extent of zone 2. There is a protective planting area, which would just be various different salt marsh species that would exist in the high marsh and will act as a kind of a natural physical barrier. And then to protect the salt marsh species. So then we'll have the upper planting zone, which will have high salt marsh species in it, then the mid marsh planting zone and the lower marsh area here. The lower marsh area is protected on the lakewood edge by eco logs. We're looking at zone 3 now. So here we've got the same thing, the protective planting area in the back, high marsh, mid marsh, low marsh, and there's a different method of treatment. There's rock fillet along the front there. It'll do a similar kind of thing, but it'll have a different impact on the site. So this is a cross section of zones 2 and 3. You can see from the broken line at the top, that's the existing foreshore grade, and the unbroken line indicates what the planned slope will be once the works are executed. Sorry, just having another look at one of the active rehabilitation zones here, or multiple. This slide shows zones 4, 5, and 6. Zone 4 is here, zone 5, and zone 6. The existing salt marsh communities are indicated by the hot pink hash that you can see in underneath the drawings there. So also here we can see ecolog installation along the front, wrack fencing to protect the young plantings in the establishment phase as well, and low marsh, mid marsh, high marsh protective planting area around the edge. cross sections of that. Once again, we have the dotted line indicating the existing profile and the unbroken line indicating the planned gradual slope. This is zone 7. There is a small drainage line, informal drainage line that runs through that. And we did note when we went out there to do inspections and scoping that there was some scouring happening there. So there is selective placement of a rock in the front there to take a little bit of the energy out of that and dissipate the flow a bit as it's coming out.
Nick wants to eat the rock fillets.
Sorry?
Nick wants to eat the rock fillets. He's
hungry. I really don't think they'd taste too good. You'd break your teeth, Nick. Yeah, so that's the last of the zones for that particular site at San Remo there. This shows the profile once again, dotted line indicating what the existing profile is and the unbroken line indicating what the planned profile that is suitable for salt marsh species to recruit there and be planted and be successful. So next we'll show you the plans for the location and the plans for the Lake Munmorah Saltmarsh Rehabilitation Site. So the location map shows the site's proximity to Lake Munmorah itself here, and the Pacific Highway there, Caloundra Bay Road runs along here, and we've got a little corner of Caloundra Lake peeking through there. So here this shows where the bit of a zoom in to where the active rehabilitation area will actually be located, right along the foreshore there between the shared pathway and the lake itself. So this site was selected due to worsening erosion along the foreshore and wrack accumulation that typically floats and breaks down in the near shore. So the works aim to protect the site against further erosion and reinstate the natural process of wrack beaching and breaking down by creating the appropriate slope to improve nearshore water quality, create improvements in habitat, foreshore resilience and stability, and enhance the salt marsh connectivity. So the outcome of the works on this particular site will be 0.15 hectare of foreshore will be rehabilitated. And so that's a length of approximately 168 metres along the foreshore there. So this is the design plan for Lake Munmorah, which we can see has, this is indicated in a different way. The low, mid and high marsh zones are marked by the separation there between the lines. So the stuff that's in front of that small, thin red line there is low marsh. The stuff that is behind it and meets that light blue line there is the mid marsh, and then from that line there back to the darker blue line is the high marsh. So on this particular site we will have, I should have noted before as well, that in San Remo there's also multiple access ways, so grassed access ways for lake access. So here, grassed access ramp there, and this will be another access ramp. That's just so that people can still use the lake and gain access to the lake without having a negative impact on the rehabilitated salt marsh area in itself. So Rocky Point, now the rehabilitation site, there's another location map showing you the site's proximity to Wolseley Avenue, Tuggerah Lake here. There's Dunsmore Oval, and even another zoom in, you can see that it also extends from, there's a reserve along the back of properties here, and then it'll come into the salt marsh, and it'll also be one that will extend out, so it'll be reclamation as well. So this is another site that's experiencing some erosion, and there's quite a lip on the foreshore edge there. So this plan itself, I'm just going to ask you guys at the moment to focus on zone 2, which is this area that I'm moving my cursor around now. And this is the area so zone 2 will take place under this grant funding, under the Environment Restoration Fund grant funding. It also indicates here the low marsh area, mid marsh and high marsh area. Along here, it shows where there will be weed control in the bordering vegetation, and it shows there in the green highlighted dots along the back there where the protective plantings will be. There's a existing informal boat ramp there that just indicates by that pink square, and the stormwater drainage lines that flow through the site are also indicated there. So the planned works are not to, the design plan means that they don't, things won't be put in those drains to congest them or to, allow them to get blocked up. They'll be kept, I think, concrete blanket lined, so which can grow, small native grasses on it, small grasses of any kind really on it, but it can be cleared up, and it's not going to be creating any congestion for the flow there, so that the water can get out from those, from the streets that drain to it. The on-ground works themselves, we get to determine the exact date for them, but say late May, June is when works are expected to take place. We will send out letters to residents in the bordering the site and properties that may be impacted by traffic change in the area due to the works. We'll mail out letters to you all to let you know the specific dates in which those works will start. Also, just letting you know that with the Budgewoi, the San Remo and the Lake Munmorah on-ground works, a small portion of the shared pathway, which borders the sites, will be closed, but it's just for the construction period of those works, which, as I said before, could run from a week to 4, really, depending on weather and efficiency, I suppose. The work hours will be from 7 AM till 6 PM, so there shouldn't be much disruption of noise beyond those hours. Pretty standard work hours there. Amazing. And I guess I'll hand you on to Nick to give us some information on how we can all help.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Ash said at the start, my name is Nick. I look after environmental education with council, and so I think I have the best job in council. I get to get outside and take people out and look at all these amazing places. And yeah, I really enjoyed all through the presentation of the previous speakers, seeing those little photos of the saltmarsh flowers there to show some of the diversity that we find amongst the saltmarsh. In our background photo, it looks beautiful and green, but when you get down nice and close, you can see all the different species and the diversity, which obviously all the animals enjoy as well. This photo here, I chose for how you can help, because this is obviously a couple of young girls planting plants around a constructed wetland. at McKillop School at Warnervale, and just the idea that it doesn't matter whether you live on the lake foreshore or anywhere else in the catchment, everyone can play their part to help look after the health of the estuary. And the more plants and the more constructed wetlands in some cases that we have, the better filtered our water will be, and then the clearer it will be and the healthier it will be for all of our plants and animals. So I'll just, you may have seen some of these or all of these posters or stickers or images around the Tuggerah Lakes catchment over the last close to 10 years, I think about 9 years. And we've used these as simple messages repeatedly for good reason, because they're good ways to encourage people to think about their actions, their every day-to-day actions to look after the health of Tuggerah Lakes. There's around about 160,000 people that live in the catchment of Tuggerah Lakes, and if every single one of us are doing the right thing at work or at home or at school, or when we're out and about, then we can all have a big collective positive impact on the lake. So some of those little things, as you can see, include picking up after your pet, and I guess that's probably fairly related to the third one along there, picking up grass clippings and putting them in the green bin or composting them at home. Some people may think that dog droppings and grass clippings are natural and not a problem to be on the ground or in our waterways, but cumulatively they add in a lot of nutrients to our waterways, and that, as Vanessa said earlier on, increases the nutrients in the waterways that can lead to increased algal growth and have impacts on our seagrass and lead to some of that buildup of sediments and organic matter in the nearshore zone, which can lead to other issues, as Vanessa and Sevi spoke about. And then, of course, picking up your rubbish and taking it with you or using the bin, obviously keep our waterways nice and clean. And yeah, another positive impact that everyone can do is washing their vehicles on their lawn rather than washing your vehicles on the driveway or the road. And also potentially using a professional car wash that recycles the water, just to keep those pollutants out of our waterways as well. Obviously, anything that lands on the ground, on the street, on the driveway, goes straight into the stormwater system and then potentially straight into our beautiful waterways. So there's lots of ways that we can all help, especially in this forum, talking about saltmarsh. You can see some beautiful saltmarsh there. If anyone listening tonight is a foreshore resident, one of the best things that you can do is not mow your property, your foreshore property, all the way down to the water's edge. You can see that beautiful saltmarsh there being enjoyed by a heron and or an egret rather, and yeah, leaving that strip of native saltmarsh plays a big role in looking after the health of the waterways. We've got lots of shared pathways around the waterway, and so sticking to the pathways and using public boat ramps and public access ways to get to the water plays a big role in reducing the amount of trampling on the saltmarsh. And same with storage. We do see lots of people storing boats and trailers and other vehicles on top of the saltmarsh. There are plenty of places to do that away from the saltmarsh to look after it. And if we can concentrate our recreation and our storage of property in places that are suitable, then we'll have more healthy saltmarsh for everyone and the wildlife to enjoy. Another good thing that everyone can do is to plant locally native species, which will not only survive and thrive because this is the area that they're from, but will also be beneficial to our animals and our waterways as well. So unfortunately, we do see saltmarsh vandalism around the shores of Tuggerah Lake. Figure that I've normally used over a number of years is that, ooh, I didn't touch anything then. So
It was me, sorry, Nick.
Is that a sign to hurry up?
No.
Yeah, so over the last 200 years, roughly, we've actually lost about 85% of the saltmarsh around the foreshores of Tuggerah Lakes. So you can see all of us here tonight care about the saltmarsh, and I'm sure most people watching tonight do as well. And it's really heartbreaking for us, especially the people that are out on the ground, council staff and the contractors and our amazing land care volunteers, to see saltmarsh being vandalised. So yeah, obviously most people live along the foreshores do the right thing and look after saltmarsh and look after it, pick up rubbish and enjoy it, enjoy the bird life and the other wildlife that they see. But we do have a small number of people that do the wrong thing. So we are asking tonight if anyone does have any ideas around preventing or stopping residents from taking it into their own hands and mowing saltmarsh all the way down to the foreshore, and with the aim of keeping what they may consider to be a nice lawn all the way to the water's edge. If anyone does have any ideas around preventing or stopping that, we'd be interested to hear. And if you do see anyone vandalising the saltmarsh, there's a couple of phone numbers there where people can report the incident to fisheries or the OEH environment hotline. So if you have any ideas or questions, yeah, feel free to ask at the end or pop them in the chat. There seems to be a bit of a lag there. Can you go to the next slide?
Yep, that's there.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'd like to talk about the ways that people can get involved. So it's a photo there of one of the kayak tours that I've taken around the entrance, and yeah, a collection of rubbish that we picked up while we were kayaking along the way. So that's one of the ways that residents can help while they're learning about the estuary and the tours that we do as well. So as has been already said tonight, we do have a couple of open forums at the moment for people to have their say on the Saltmarsh sites, the Saltmarsh Rehabilitation projects that we have. So there's a couple of web links there that you can take down to find out a little bit more about the projects that we're running, the ones that we've already spoken about tonight on that top link there about the Tuggerah Lakes restoration, and also some other projects and the development of our coastal zone management plans on the second link. We also have a really amazing and extensive environmental volunteer program at council, and there are many groups around the Central Coast, and there's a few particularly relevant ones to tonight's presentation. For example, Budgewoi Island Land Care Group, the Buff Point Land Care Group, and Killarney Vale Saltmarsh Land Care Group. That's a few examples of the groups that we have around the foreshores of the lake, where a lot of mostly foreshore residents come down and have really made a difference to the foreshores over the years, and have really built a community with their neighbours there to make a difference and learn and work with council. There's lots of different activities that people can partake in when joining the volunteer program. It's not only planting or weeding, but there's lots of other projects and activities that people can take part in, depending on their interest and their time commitment and I guess their physical ability. So we also do seed collection and propagation. There's an exciting project at the moment happening with our Wadalba group, where they're monitoring squirrel gliders with radio trackers. There's also education with lots of free training that we give to volunteers as well. And it's also a really great chance to get outside, to be active and socialise with other people. And lots of the people that join these groups create long-standing friendships and enjoy those times with like-minded new friends and neighbours. So great way to get involved. We also have quite a few water watch groups around the catchment, some that work really close to the foreshore, some that work a little bit further back in the catchment, but some of those volunteers and groups have really helped improve the water quality of Tuggerah Lakes by discovering sources of pollution and then reporting those back to council. And then council has been able to take steps to stop the pollution at its source, and then to filter and treat the water before it reaches Tuggerah Lakes. So really great example of that is that Long Jetty and the Saltmarsh swale that has been installed there by council to treat higher levels of nutrients entering the lake there. We've also got lots of projects with the Community Environment Network, including their nursery, and simple things that everyone can do every day informally without necessarily joining a group, like Take 3 for the Sea, picking up 3 pieces of rubbish when you're out and about and putting them in the bin or recycling them. Other things that you could do to get involved, there's a really active group of birders on the Central Coast, and great for people to get involved with citizen science to contribute bird surveys. That's really, if you live near the lake or if you go for a walk regularly, or if you have been doing any saltmarsh works or you've seen some of the council saltmarsh works, it's great if you can contribute surveys, and that's the way that we know that the works that we've done have been making a difference. If we notice an increase in the number of birds, the number of birds or the number of species of birds in those areas, birds coming in to those areas because the habitat's been improved. We run quite a few activities at council. So there may be tours like kayaking, bike riding, bushwalking, spotlighting, other events and workshops. So keep an eye on our events page, and we normally open the bookings through Eventbrite, just such as tonight's webinar. And talk to your neighbours and friends. So if you see something or you know something, or if you've learned something tonight, talk to your neighbours and your friends about it and encourage them to learn more as well. So different ways to find out more. I've got the email address there of the waterways team. So if you'd like to ask anything, particularly from tonight, send an email and one of us will get back to you. We have a designated waterways website, which has pages and pages of information around the estuary and the ecology, the management plans and the projects that we've done. We've also created several multi-touch books. So these are books that are really interactive. On the right-hand side there, you can see a page from the book, which has information. You can also see the little photo of the salt marsh there and the little dots underneath it, which means you can scroll across. So there's quite a few photos there. There's lots of activities in the books. There's videos, bird calls, frog sounds, all kinds of interactive fun things to make them engaging and fun. You can download those on Apple and the iTunes or the Google Play Store, or you can just look at them on our website as just a flip-through book.
Might be
we also have
worthwhile.
an app.
Sorry, just wanted to mention as well, might be worthwhile saying that they're all free downloads as well. And often some of the tours and the workshops that we do, we also host for free as well. So just, get in touch and find out.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. We have an app called Tuggerah Lakes Explore, which is free to download as well. And that has all the best bird watching, cycling and walking and fishing sites around the estuary. Lots of information on there, heaps of bird photos and information on what you might see at particular sites. And we've also created quite a few films over the years and a couple of really amazing animations that you may have seen at the movies. So they're available to watch on our YouTube channel, and they're great things to share with people as well, to share that information. So wrapping up, I guess, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'll pass over to Ash, I think, and open it up to any questions that people may have.
Amazing. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone. Gosh, hopefully everyone can resonate with my earlier sentiment about what an incredible team I'm so blessed to work with. That was a really clear insight into everyone's different areas of knowledge and passion, and thank you, team, for sharing that so beautifully and articulately. And thank you for everyone's comments and feedback so far. Rob, thank you for your suggestions on some ways that we can help prevent saltmarsh vandalism. I don't think anyone else can see those comments, Rob. You've just sent them to us as the host. I don't know if maybe you did want to share them to everyone so everyone can see those ideas that you have. That could be a really good starting point for us to launch off some discussions about any other ideas that anyone might have on how we can try and avoid that illegal mowing of the saltmarsh. Something that's really, really heartbreaking to us. Also, any feedback anyone has on the plans that we presented to you. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see our faces. There we go. Happy to hand over the microphone to anyone who might want to talk. If you do, just pop your hand up and I can click a button that gives you the ability to talk. If you don't feel comfortable talking, happy for you to pop a comment in the comments box or answer or write a question to us in the Q&A box. we really do want to take this opportunity to get your input, your feedback, your thoughts. This is a collaborative process. We're all learning together. We're all trying to work together. It's really important for us to hear what you guys have to say, to hear what you think, what you'd like to see before we proceed any further. That's the whole purpose of this evening, to make sure that we don't just go ahead and do these works without really consulting with the community first. And if anyone lives directly adjacent to any of those sites where these 4 proposed projects are going to happen, we'd really particularly love to hear from you. So can't see any hands up yet. Pop your hand up if you'd like to chat. Pop a comment. It's really beautiful to see some positive feedback. Thank you. That actually really means a lot to us. You might be surprised to hear that council staff members, we don't really get a lot of positive feedback that often. We do what we do because we love it. We're all really, really passionate about what we do, and we really love what we do. But it can be a hard job some days, and yeah, getting positive feedback isn't something that really freely flows our way a lot of the time. So we actually do really, really appreciate those very kind comments. So thank you for them. That's very kind. Rob, no one else can read yours yet, but I'm just going to read that out if you don't mind. So Rob suggested that maybe rules can be introduced to prevent foreshore residents from mowing and vandalising, and maybe some penalties can be imposed on mowing in the same way that illegal tree removal is, and perhaps even to introduce a protection zone around the lake would be a good start. So yeah, those are really great ideas, Rob. It is illegal. It is already illegal, and there are the potential for penalties to be imposed. So those rules definitely do already stand. Because it's an endangered ecological community is protected by law by the Biodiversity Conservation Act. So if anyone is caught vandalising, then yeah, there is the ability for them to be fined and prosecuted. We like to try and first take a more gentle, kind, heartfelt, connected approach to help people understand why it's important to protect that environment, to help people realize that it's actually their friend. Like it's not going to grow big and tall and obstruct their view. It's actually going to be really helpful for bringing better water quality, bringing better foreshore quality, bringing beautiful wildlife. So we prefer to try, at least at first, to take an approach of educating, inspiring, connecting to people's hearts, helping them to realize why it's important to protect it, to get everyone on the same page. So if you guys can help be our advocates out there in the community to help get that message out there, that would really, really be helpful to us. The more people having those conversations, the better. If you do see something, really great opportunity to say something, and yeah, we can definitely try and resort to fines and litigation through that reporting process as well, if we need to go down that route, if that sort of heart connected process doesn't work for some people.
Yeah, look, I think it's yep, you can hear me. I think it's important to mention as well that in the local environmental plan, there is a protective zone around the foreshore itself. There's a buffer zone in which, even maintenance by council maintenance workers is not meant to happen. And same on residential properties, on foreshore areas that are adjacent to residential properties. But as you can imagine, with the amount of foreshore that we have, with the 3 connected lakes, it's a lot to try to enforce, especially when we're coming from a history of it not being the focus. And I suppose, us not understanding the impacts of changing the foreshore edge, the impacts of changing the vegetation that surrounds the lake system in the foreshore zone. And now, the knowledge continues to grow, and the legislation in place and environmental controls, the local environmental plan reflect that growth of knowledge. Yet it's very hard to get that information out there to everybody, and bring people on side with it as well, unless I suppose they can see the benefit of it themselves. And I think that'll be a longer piece of work for you know, for us to continue to communicate those changes in water quality and the changes in stability along the foreshore. Yeah, so work with us, and you know, hopefully you can help us quicken up that process a little bit.
Yeah, great contribution from Sam as well. Thanks, Sam. Sam suggested, what about information leaflets to foreshore residents, which I did pretty recently, a few weeks ago. I didn't post them. I went and did some letterbox drop. If anyone lives on the foreshore of any of those regions, you might have received a little letterbox drop from me that included information about tonight and a Saltmarsh brochure, as well as information about some kayaking tours that we did recently. So one of our approaches that we've used in these past few weeks that we did through a leaflet drop to those foreshore residents was inviting people to come on a free kayak tour. We thought that that's a really good opportunity for us to talk to you guys and to the other fellow residents that live on that foreshore area, to help them see from the water the importance of that salt marsh, to feel that connection to the lake. You know, we really believe that experiencing it allows you to love it, and you have to love something to want to care for it and to protect it. And so trying to take that approach is something that we've used recently. So hopefully some of you got those in your letterboxes, and yeah, it's definitely something we can investigate more, Sam. Maybe we can put together a new brochure more specific to mowing. We're also designing up some new little signs that'll go in along those foreshores, just some little sort of A3 ones to accompany the no mow markers. The no mow markers say do not mow here, but they don't have actual information on them. So we can accompany them with some more little information posters.
Yeah, some of those new ones we've had made up as well, just on the larger rings, say threatened plant community on them as well. So we'll say no mow zone, threatened plant community, just to give like a bit more information to people as an indicator. We're not just asking you to not mow here because, you know, we're grouchy. We're asking you to protect a threatened plant community. And that's, you know, people can, I guess, then see it a little easier and become more aware with that messaging.
Yeah. Em's just said that she didn't realize, or that they didn't realize, that the kayaking was related. Nick, I don't know if you want to talk to that at all. Nick's our kayak guide extraordinaire, but I think there really is a close relationship there between the work that we do on the kayak tours and the work that we've talked about tonight.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and it was great to kayak along those sites and talk with Sevi and Sashi about the particular sites from the water, and approach those sites from the water and look at them closely. And yeah, especially the paddle that we did at Tacoma, there was residents on the paddle that could see their house from the kayak, and it's good for them to see it from a different perspective as well. And we definitely will be doing more kayak tours, possibly not between now and spring, but definitely more as the weather warms up again, in starting from probably about September, and definitely around the time of the Lakes Festival in November. And it would be good to do some more targeted ones again in a few months' time, especially if we keep an eye on these saltmarsh sites and see how they progress and grow and improve over the next few months as well.
If you guys want to express your interest, feel free to send us an email to that Waterways email address. We can maybe put together like a special little list. We can add your names to it, and we can let you know when we have those next ones coming up, if that's something that you would be interested in. Em also asked, does the waterways include Brisbane water, and will there be a saltmarsh project down there? I don't know if anyone wants to talk to that question.
So yes, we cover the entire Central Coast, so that includes from Lake Macquarie right down to the Hawkesbury.
Just lift your mic up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
The coastal lagoons, untangled now. And so we've already got some wetland and salt marsh restoration programs running down there, which are long-standing ones around Erina, Bensville, Davistown, Saratoga, those kinds of places where salt marsh is already present. And so that's done through contractors. But because Brisbane Water is not as fortunate as Tuggerah Lakes to have these big grant programs, that's done through, you know, our internal revenue. So we do have some internal budgets for wetland restoration, which are directed to Brisbane Water and, you know, the areas around Terrigal Lagoon and Avoca Lagoon, those places, because we've got this healthy budget for Tuggerah. But we have been evaluating the health of our wetlands all around those areas, and the priorities will go into that coastal management program for that area.
I could just add that a couple of years ago, we had a state government grant for Brisbane water education. So Ash and I did quite a few activities for Brisbane water in terms of kayak tours and installing signage and bird sound wheels, etc. in the area, and also developed a Brisbane water multi-touch book and a Brisbane water community handbook, which is free for people as well. So there's a fair bit of information out there about the salt marsh as well.
We just had a new one from Sam saying that in Killarney Vale there are small rope barriers protecting some saltmarsh areas, and that Sam thinks that this works well as a good reminder. Thanks, Sam. Definitely something for us to potentially consider.
Yeah, look, I think that it definitely is effective, Sam. It's kind of the step that we go to when the smaller markers and the pamphlets and the education kind of isn't really working, when we have to kind of put something physical in place to stop people from entering those areas. And, ideally, we can get more works done if we're not having to pay for the infrastructure to keep people out. If we can get, an understanding and appreciation for, we are gentler around these areas and we use the grassed access ways or the formal access ways, rather than trampling large areas of the site. That way we can, I suppose, learn to not have everything boarded off and signposted, to work within and have respect for the environment that we live in and depend on.
I think those sites along the Killarney Vale foreshore were some of the very first ones we'd done. So we've been doing this for 12 or so years now, and at that point in time this was a bit of a new scary concept for people who lived on the foreshore, so that delineation was needed. But as Sashi said, we're kind of moving away from that now, where people are having more awareness of the value of it. They're seeing that it's not this obtrusive thing that's going to block their views and be ugly and all of the concerns people had way back when. So the fences are less necessary, and as Sashi said too, it means more money can go into the actual restoration work and maintenance of those sites over time.
But it is a really fair point that if we get to the point where we've educated the community members about it and we've got the no-mow markers and it's just failing, that might be a good place to move to again if we can't get that site to establish properly.
I've just dropped our email address in the chat again. If anyone wants to direct any further comments or questions directly to us, just pop an email through to that Waterways email address and one of us will jump on and access it. Oh, another one from Brian talking about the floods. So how much damage is caused to the regeneration of the foreshore when significant flooding occurs? Or does the regeneration handle it fairly well? Good question.
It is a really good question. Estuaries are designed to flood. That's what they do naturally. So when a salt marsh is well established, a flood is good for it because it's pushing that, organic material up and giving it some nutrients for it to continue to grow. It, adds some salinity to the soil, which is also good for those salt tolerant species, and it wipes out some of the weeds. So it's a really good thing. And I have to say, I've been with council for a long time now, and we started building salt marshes and restoring salt marshes at the end of that millennium drought. And the amount of salt marsh that has just come back because we've got more rain now and we've got more inundation of the foreshores is absolutely phenomenal. So that's really encouraging to see. I suppose if we have a flood, right, when we've just built a new site, that's a different matter. But in general, they handle it really well.
That's probably why we put up those protection barriers, isn't it? We try and protect them temporarily until they're established by putting up some of those sort of fences and the coir logs and those sort of things to temporarily give it a little bit of a reprieve until it's established enough to cope.
That's right.
Definitely an active site.
It's just at the establishment phase, whilst the salt marsh is still very young and it doesn't bounce back quite as well as once it's had a bit more time to establish and can dry out the wrack once it's beached itself on there, and that will help being dry for it to break down and feed the salt marsh, condition the soil and help it grow and spread and thrive.
And one good example too is you know, after the recent flooding that we've had and the really, really inundated foreshores from the recent rainfalls, we've got sections of introduced grass species that are just completely dead. You know, too much salinity, too much inundation. Whereas in the salt marsh might, you know, look a little bit brown for a few weeks after a major flood once they've been underwater for several weeks, but they tend to bounce back really, really quickly, and you get that nice transition of, you know, brown salt marsh to instant green, whereas in the introduced grasses tend to take a long time to recover, and you end up with a lot of bare patches on the foreshore where you've just got introduced grass species. So the salt marsh does bounce back really well compared to introduced grasses.
Thanks, Mel. And thank you to all of our incredible attendees. You've been very, very nice to us. We were a little bit nervous, so thank you for being gentle and kind and supportive. It's really very much appreciated, as I said before. And if no one else has any comments, then we'll let everyone enjoy the rest of their evening. Again, thank you so much. Oh, we have a hand up. Dom, would you like to talk? I can allow you the microphone if you'd like to talk, Dom. You can unmute yourself if you would like to, or you can type a question. Let me know if you need help, Dom. If you want to unmute yourself down in the bottom left, there's just a little mute button. You should be able to take yourself off mute. If it's not showing up, if you hover your mouse down in the bottom, you should have that appearing, allow you to unmute yourself if you wanted to chat into your microphone. Can shoot through an unmute request. There we go. The microphone's yours, Dom.
Oh, yeah, well done. Great talk. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, we've just got something popped up in the Q&A. Dom, great talk. Thanks. Beautiful. All right, well, on that note, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support, and hopefully we'll see you at a kayak soon.